Testing 1 2. Can you hear me? Testing 1 2. Can you hear me? Somebody who's listening. Testing 1 2. Can you hear me? Oh man. Yes. All right. If I can get quicker answers than that next time, that'll be helpful, y'all. So we're transforming the Bible study in real time. But we're gonna keep working with this. So listen. Sorry about that. I apologize that you couldn't hear me. What I was saying, this word transformation, what we think about when we hear this word transformation. A lot of us think about, losing weight. We think about maybe a person used to wear casual clothes, but now they dress up all the time, and they would see that as a transformation. But what is a real transformation? What is the transformation that is taking place in the Bible here in this chapter 9, Saul becoming Paul? What is that transformation, and what does it require for a transformation? Well, the first thing that we ought to understand before I read this word, the first thing that we ought to understand is that transformation comes from the Greek word metamorphosis. So transformation comes from the Greek word metamorphosis. And metamorphosis is either it could be sudden or it could be slow, but significant changes that are taking place over time. That you do a complete change. Now, the transformation we're talking about is not one, for example, the animal kingdom have transformations, things that transform from one thing to the other. So caterpillars become butterflies, that the caterpillar can move around on land, but the butterfly can now fly. So it transforms into something completely different, but also it transforms into something that gives it a new ability, a new feature, a new it's equipped with something that can take it now further. That's what a real transformation is. And the transformation that we're talking about is in character and condition. What is your character, and what condition is your relationship with God in? Because we ought to consistently be evaluating our relationship with God. Let's look at chapter 9, and I would encourage you to read the entire chapter from verse 1 all the way, I believe, to verse 30. So let's look at, I'll just open up. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. He might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" May the Lord add a blessing to the reading and hearing of his word for the edification of our souls. So Saul is getting ready to undergo a significant transformation. We know this because there is clear contrast of how Paul or Saul treated certain people before his transformation, and then how he treated others after his transformation. It says that Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples, that not only was he letting you know that he did not believe in what you're doing, but he's going to, in fact, do something about it. And so you see that he was committed to being a resistance to the spreading of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because remember, the church now is kind of scattered about on the run, because Stephen, who is considered the first deacon, has been martyred. He's been stoned to death. And so people now who are in Damascus, who is starting to create a population of those who are believers in Jesus Christ, Paul is now ready to go after them in Damascus, and he's looking for authority or endorsement to be given to him by the Jewish authorities in Jerusalem. And so he wanted to be the sheriff, if you will, of for God in his mind. That he, and not only that he is threatening to lock you up, but he's also threatened to send you to death. It says murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. So he was serious. He was not playing. And then he says, I'm coming to lock up or send to their death men or women. It does not matter your gender. I'm treating men and women all the same way when it comes to this. And so you look at a person like this, when you look at a person that's so committed to the wrong thing, so committed to a direction that has them headed towards devastation and destruction. And you say about people like this, that what if they allow God to use them? Yeah, what if the same ways that you have, that if you allow God to begin the transformation process and work with you, he'll be able to take those same things that's causing destruction in your life, and he'll utilize them and equip them in such a way that they can work for your good in your life. So watch this. There are three things that happens in a transformation, other than how you dress, how much, even though it's good to make a physical transformation in regards to your health, but what about character and condition? It is Saul's character and condition getting ready to undergo this transformation. Transformation itself requires three things. It requires redirection. That it requires patience, and it requires rebirth. Now, I'll tell you something, that I'd rather be a person who can hear the truth and acknowledge where I was wrong at or headed in the wrong direction, so I can make that adjustment or that change. Paul was a person who thought he was headed to the right, in the right direction, but he had intentions of doing the wrong things when he got there. So his intention was to lock up anybody that is a follower of the way. Now here, I just want to indicate to those who have come to Bible study to actually learn something about the Bible, God, and their relationship with him, that in fact, that the word of God says here that he asked the high priest for letters of the synagogue in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way. Now, did you catch that? For anybody that belonged to the way. So they were not called Christians. They, first and foremost, the church, when it was formed, people did not refer to them as Christians. That term did not apply or start. We weren't start calling that to almost 400 years after the fact. They were called followers of the way. Other folk referred to people who believed in Jesus Christ as followers of the way. So this would have been something that would have been familiar to them as followers of the way. But if you went back down then and say, hey, my Christian brother and sister, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. But they would consider themselves followers of the way. All right, now, so transformation requires redirection. The first thing about, if you really want to have a transformation in your life, is to understand that it requires a redirection in your life. A redirection, because for you to acknowledge that I need a transformation, then that means you're acknowledging that what I was doing was not working. So when you need a redirection, you need to be stopped in your tracks. What happens here with Saul, he was headed fast nowhere. He was in a hurry to do the wrong thing, believing he was doing the right thing. That's the worst place to be to believe what you're doing is in the name of God. What God does not have any connection with this kind of cruelty or condemnation. That's why the gospel was the good news, and it was to be spread in Samaria, Judea, Samaria, and all the areas that the Gentiles was in, because God is going to make it clear. Jesus is going to make this clear very soon who Saul really is. So a redirection is required. Where do we see the redirection? We see the redirection take place as Saul was headed to Damascus. The word says, as he got close to Damascus, there was what? A blinding light that shone around him that put him straight to the ground, straight to the ground. It stopped him in his tracks, right where he was. You see, up until then, Saul understood, thought he knew everything he needed to know. He thought he was at the top as far as knowledge about God. He felt like what he was doing was the right thing, and nobody could not tell him anything other than that. There are some moments, what a transformative moment is, it's truly an encounter with reality. It is an encounter with the divine. And when you have an encounter with the divine, you're going to be stopped right in your tracks. So sometimes we need to be stopped in our tracks because we're headed in the wrong direction. We're about to do the wrong thing. We're about to say the wrong thing. So beginning a transformation process, first and foremost, requires you to stop doing what you've been doing. If you want to transform into, let's say, fitness, and you want to lose weight or gain muscle, losing weight is going to require you to stop doing certain things that you're doing. You may be eating too much sugar. You may be whatever you're indulging at. It's going to first and foremost require you to stop that, because this does not get you to that place, that outcome that you want for your life. And so God will divinely intervene to redirect your life. The question is, are you listening for that redirection? So now Paul is traveling on this road. He's headed to Damascus, and this entire time in his mind, he is committed to putting people in jail, locking them up. That anybody that's a believer in Jesus Christ, this is what his purpose is. Now watch this. Because the church was scattered at the time, the people who were there, who were believers, already got the word out that Saul is on his way to lock them up or murder them, but he's going to take them off from Damascus to Jerusalem to put them in prisoners. Essentially, when he gets there, you are about to become a prisoner. Now watch this. That was Saul's goal, to go and do that. But this is what God does. Minutes before he can get there, and right for you to understand, Saul's condition at the time was doomed. He was doomed because he had not accepted Christ in his life. And anybody that has not accepted Christ in their life, you can travel as fast as you want and the fanciest things you want. You can feel you're the smartest or the brightest, but you are doomed in that condition, my Lord. So as he's moving fast in this doomed condition, deliberately, he's now looking to doom others. And for a fledgling church, for people who have now been scattered because somebody they know has been taken out and stoned for their beliefs, now you got the chief one, the main hater, if you will, the main one that people know he means business. What he say, he'll lock you and your children up. He's on the way here. And right before he gets there, watch this. This is how God works. Right before disaster and doom was to take place for those believers in the city, God then shows up and intervenes. Jesus Christ intervenes because he stops Saul in his tracks. Your transforming process takes place because now God stops you from doing things that were dooming you or sending you to doom. Now he will stop you in your tracks to redirect you to doing things that's in favor of your deliverance. So this is how it works, that when God redirects one, even though that can happen privately somewhere, he will then, in fact, it will impact others publicly. It will impact others, the Christians who are now there. They didn't call themselves that. The believers now can say to themselves, nobody but the Lord could have done this, because had it not been for God to stop Saul in his tracks, we would be dragged off to Jerusalem as prisoners. But instead, now we get to survive and to thrive, to become stronger followers and believers of Christ. And the main one that was coming to do harm is now here to do help. That's transforming it. The transformation process can be painful, it can be messy, but the main thing it has to be is intentional. That when you have an experience with God and an encounter with God, that you have to listen. You have to begin to listen, not begin to tell God, I plan to go here, I plan to do this. If God is stopping you, he's stopping you for a reason, so that your GPS can be rerouted, so that you can in fact be directed to your divine destination. So we see that in fact Saul was grounded for a moment from doing what he was trying to do. And a lot of times when we get grounded by God, we think that's a negative thing, that God has stopped or he has in fact slowed us down. But let me give you this example, that being grounded, being stopped by God, being interrupted by God can be a great thing for you, because had not God interrupted my life, I might be dead and gone right now. Had God not had, I had not had an encounter with him, a ongoing transformational process in my life would have never began to happen. Let me tell you, had I not been interrupted by God in my life, had I not been stopped by God in my life, so he can begin to speak to me, show me, and demonstrate to me that I'm headed on the wrong path. Listen, there may have been some things that never would transformed or transpired in my life. So here it is, he was grounded. Let me give you this example about being grounded, and which leads me into patience. When you're undergoing a transformation, the first thing is you have to understand that it's no longer about you, but it's about those that are there to help you. Saul took off on his way to Damascus to do harm there, but now he's in a place he's unfamiliar with. And because now he's in a place that he's unfamiliar, it will require help from others. All right, let me show you what I'm talking about. Verse 7 says, well, let's get to Jesus asked Saul, as he's grounded, why are you persecuting me? Now, let me go ahead and give you this analogy real quick. There are geese, and what I've learned about geese, most people will call them ducks, but they're not really ducks, but they are in that bird family. They're geese. You may have seen them. They're fish. They protect their children. They're considered migratory. They fly here in the winter, fly there in the spring, and some are resident. But this is what I've learned about geese, because the neighborhood I operate in and work in, they have these resident geese there. I've seen them have a gosling or a chick, a baby. I've seen them interact with one another. But lately, I've been seeing them shed these feathers everywhere. They're shedding the feathers everywhere, and they're on the ground. Now, watch this. What I've learned was that geese, out of a year, that it is required for 1 month to be on the ground while it goes through a molting phase. And what that phase is that it's flight feathers. Number one, it's flight feathers, the feathers that it's been using to fly the skies for about 11 months now need to die off. Lord have mercy. So what happens is it's grounded for 30 days. Now, this is the kicker. The days usually that it's grounded is the time they usually have babies. So them being on the ground now makes them more vigilant towards their babies, and it makes them more in present with the family. The male will watch and protect, while the female is nurturing the young ones, and vice versa. By the way, there's another thing you can learn from geese that I learned: their loyalty to one another. We talk about side pieces, and everybody want to do what they want to do in relationships these days. And we say, well, in different cultures and places, for example, in Africa, it's polytheist, which would you believe that you should be able to have many wives as long as you can afford them. And then here they only say you can have one. Well, look, you can look into the animal kingdom, and the geese, when they mate with one another to have a child, they mate for life. I'm with you for life. I'm through the good, through the bad, through the ugly. And so I began to have respect for these geese, and I wondered why they would be grounded for a month. Well, it was for them to lose those old wings that have been now battered by the winds and the storms, the past winds, the past storms, the past challenges. Now for 30 days, even though it's uncomfortable, now you can't fly like you want to, but now that's because you got to pay attention to other things you may have not been paying attention to. It's a little more dangerous for them to be on the ground and not be able to fly away, but it's more dangerous to be on the same wings you've been using for the last 12 months and take them and try to fly through new storms, stronger storms, bigger storms. And so what happens is God grounds those geese for their good, not for their defeat, but for their deliverance. That this may be a painful time, but use it wisely, because in 30 days you're going to have new flight wings that's going to allow you to fly through the new storms that are approaching you, to fly through the new challenges that are headed your way. I'm not going to allow you to try to get through these storms with old wings, but I'm finna give you new wings. And even if you look at it, that they're grounded for 30 days, watch this, you still get to fly for 11 months, my Lord. And so just the fact that they get to fly around 11 months is a blessing to me. That just demonstrates to me that when God takes things from us, we ought to not complain about it, but we ought to lift them up, because if he taking one thing away from us, it's because he's about to give us something new. He's about to give us something better. And so redirection is just that. He's pointing you in a better direction. He's pointing you to a better outcome. I got to go on. So transformation requires patience. For 30 days, those geese have to wait for those old feathers to fall off, my Lord. Well, Paul in his Saul becoming Paul in his transformation, that when he was blinded, watch this, when he was blinded and stopped in his tracks, the next thing he had to do was follow instructions from Jesus. And So it no longer was about what he was trying to do or want to do. What his eyes, he had learned from his encounter with God that even though his eyes was open, he was operating blindly. There are people who their eyes are open, but they still blind. See, God is not just trying to give you physical sight, but he's trying to give you spiritual sight. And so now when you begin to undergo a transformation process, you learn that, one, it requires some work from me. One, I had to follow the instructions. What were the instructions? He says, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now watch this. You don't hear a response back from Saul saying, well, I don't care about that. That's you. Or, let me lock you up then. Let me this, that. The moment was so extraordinary that all he could do was take instructions now from Jesus. See, even though Saul had not fully become Paul, your transformation process is an ongoing process to be completed. But once the transformation process begins, you are instantly changed in your heart. You are instantly changed how you view things. And now you got to begin to work on some things. You acknowledge your strengths, but you also acknowledge your weaknesses. And so you begin to practice things that will strengthen where you're weak, and practice things that will continue to elevate where you're strong at. So he says in verse 6, Jesus' response to him wasn't trying to convince him of anything. He gave him instructions. He says, now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Now, look, having patience is good through your transformation process, because when sometimes you're trying to rush things that you can't rush. That you know, if you want to cook certain things, you can't cook them faster. You have to cook them based off the time that it takes for them to cook and be complete. Lord have mercy. And you can call it a season, you can call it a moment in your life, or you can call it what you want. But you have to, one, get to a place in your life where you're patient enough to, one, follow the instructions of God, trusting him with your life. See, Saul thought he knew everything and had his plan, but now the plan been interrupted and disrupted, because now he's blind. He's aware of his own blindness now. And that is a good place to be aware of where you're blind at, to be aware of your blind spots. Because when you're moving around here and not thinking that you got the best vision in your life, you got the best plan for your life, you will have a blind spot and it'll lead you into an accident. So what happened next? He was given instructions by Jesus on what to do. So now Saul has to follow these instructions, because it ain't about what he see, it's about what he has to hear. He has to begin to listen to the word of God. There are things, people oftentimes are looking for things to be placed in their life or to happen in their life, but God is not looking to give you a visual. He's looking for you to listen, to hear what he has to say to you. So here it is. Saul gets up. He's led to a certain place. Now watch this. Now the one who had all the authority, the one who could impact other folk life, has to now take his life and put it in the hands of others. You have to understand that if you're going to really go through a transformation or a transformative process, that, one, you have to have patience with God's plan for your life. Two, you got to trust God. And three, you have to be willing to allow other folk to assist you in your transformation. Because what God does is he sends you people along the way that can help you get to another portion or part or phase or cycle in your transformation. It says, verse 7, the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. That's what's strange to me, that there are things that are actually in our presence that we can't see, but it's there. Why do we have a hard time believing God's presence is there, but we can't see it? How do we have a hard time believing that the Holy Spirit's presence is there, but we can't see it? Light itself is a spectrum of different colors. And as human beings, we can only see so many aspects of light, but there are more aspects of life visible that are there in our presence than we can actually see with our eyes. In other words, I'm saying that even when you can't see it there, you got to still trust that God is there. That when you're going through your storm, when you're going through your trials, you still got to know that God is there. You got to listen to his word, but you got to stand on his promises of what he already told you. Because sometimes what you're looking for, it ain't gonna always look like what you want. But that's when you got to listen closely to the Lord. That's when you got to be patient in your prayers, patience in your process as you go through your transformation process. Patience is important, because when you're not patient, what happens is when it don't look like what God told you it would be like, then you panic and put it in your hands. And now you stall or delay your transformation process. And so you got to keep trusting God. And surely here it is. We see Saul becoming Paul. We see a man who is truly transforming. Now, when undergoing a transformation does not mean it happens overnight. That's where people get this thing confused. First, what happened was he was knocked off his horse. He was grounded. Now God has his attention. The next thing he had to do was take God's instruction. He was in a place of blindness where he knew he was blind now, and he also knew the things that he was about to do to others. And so now he's with himself and God, and all he can do in these 3 days and 3 nights where he can't see, where he can't eat, is trust other folk who God has placed in his life and depend on God solely and wholly. And that's why it's important that when you go through your transformation process, that you understand that it may not happen overnight. But just because it doesn't happen overnight doesn't mean you still the same person you used to be. Yeah, I might not be who God in the finished product of it, of who I'm supposed to be. But I tell you, I'm definitely not who I used to be. And so as long as you can keep working on the process, as long as you can keep evolving in God's plan and purpose for your life, you will continue to become what? New. You will continue to be transformed, not in just how you look on the outside, but how you feel on the inside, how you treat others. So not only your character changes, but your condition changes. The third thing is transformation requires a rebirth. And essentially, Saul was shook up so much from going in one direction that he's now going in a new direction. Now watch this, to the point that I was making, that we need other folk in our lives. Who did Saul need? So one, he had an encounter with Christ that knocked him off his horse, and now God has his attention. But then now he can't see people, but he has to hear and deal with the people that God has placed in his life. All right, so he's trusting that now. Then there is an Ananias who God speaks to in a vision, and he tells Ananias that I want you to go to this certain house, and when you get there, I want you to lay hands on Saul so that the scales, his blindness can go away, his sight can be restored to him. Well, Ananias did have some reservations, because in verse 15 he says, but the Lord said that, he says in verse 13, Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. Now watch this. Some of us can't get through begin a transformation process because we're still being held bound to our own past. We are afraid to begin a transformation process because we are being held hostage by what we allowing other people to feel about what we're going to do. That people may bring up my past. People may say this. Well, let me show you something, that when God begins to work a transformation in your life, this is what God says. God didn't say, oh, yeah, I heard those things about him too. I think we ought to rethink this. God didn't say, yeah, you're right, Ananias, because he's that way, we shouldn't do nothing for him. No, what God says is, go to this man. He is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. Now, let me explain something to you about the instrument. Let me tell you, whether you are a flute, whether you are a horn, whether you are a guitar, whatever instrument, if you're an instrument, you are specifically designed to what? To give God praise, honor, and glory. And he says, this man shall be my instrument. God oftentimes takes those that you would say you got to be crazy to believe they doing this now. God takes those very people and move them from doing very negative things to very positive things. He says, this is my instrument. And what I'm trying to say to you is, whether I took an instrument and I threw it in some dirt and then I picked it back up, all I have to do is shake it off a little bit and blow through it. It can still make music. In other words, you can never give up on yourself in the process, that because you may not look like where you're supposed to be, you may not even oftentimes feel like that, but because you're God's instrument, because God has uniquely designed you some way, that if the right situation come along, and you will make music. You will make music. So in other words, the rebirth process that Saul became Paul, the rebirth process, and it's important to have a rebirth. A rebirth is in the sense that, look, you were physically born once, but there comes a time in our lives that everything we're taught and believe is shook up. the very foundation that you stood on and stand on. And now what do you do? So this is the rebirth moment where you enter a new phase of your life, a new direction that you have decided that you're going to give it all to God. And no matter where this leads, because I'm following God, I'm willing to go. That's a rebirth. A rebirth is it may not have been going well for me down this road, but because now I've been redirected, because now I got patience with this process, because now I'm going to stay in his word, because now I'm not just going to know about God, but I'm going to have actually met God. Yeah, I know a lot of people that know a lot about God, but oftentimes I will have the question, when you get done, watch how they live, and do you know God though? Have you actually met God yourself? Have you been in God's presence and God been in your presence? Let me get on and move on. So transformation process is it's a challenging process because it requires you to completely go in a new direction. And I want you to understand, to not be afraid of to go in this new direction. Saul became Paul. Saul's condition and his character changed. And when he got to Damascus, the main people that he was going to lock up are the very people that helped set him free. Because remember, as Saul got to Damascus and then his life changed and everybody witnessed, people were afraid. They didn't want to, as you saw, Ananias said, did you hear these reports about him, what he was doing? What did God do? God didn't do nothing but endorse him, said, this is my instrument. And that's why we can't be questioning God about certain things, what he's doing in our life and someone else's life, because God always has a bigger picture than we do. We can only see what's happening in front of us, but God can see what's happening in front of us, around us, below us, and above us. He got us protected, and he got eyes on all angles around us, 360 above and below. He is his eye is on the sparrow. And so you just got to know why you're singing, because everybody won't always know that when you're going through this stress and you're stressed and filled with anxiety, but yet you find a way to say his eye is on the sparrow, that you in fact know that what nobody can see, but that you know is there. Yeah, you can't physically see God right here in my life, but you know, I know that God is with me, and you know that God is with me, because what I come to do, I'm no longer trying to do. I come to lock you up and to take you off as prisoners, but now I've come here to preach alongside of you the goodness of God, the good news and the gospel. And so what happened was, while they thought the church would be weakened, because Paul now was about to weaken the church and arrest these people and send to death many of these people, instead he ends up, the very people he was looking to arrest, the very people he was looking to put to death, are the same people he had to now depend on. He's the same people he had to now depend on that helped him get out of that city when they were ready to kill him now, because the same folk he left are now mad at him. And so what he was getting ready to do to them, now these folk are ready to do to him. And so listen, the bottom line is, though, no one can do anything that God does not allow. And anything that happened to you, and that's why, as I close out in this transformation process, that Saul becoming Paul, he was becoming complete in his transformation in Romans, when he said in Romans 8:28, he says, and we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. That, in other words, that even if something negative is taking place, even if new storms approach that are bigger than the last storm, I don't have to worry about it, because now God is not having me use the same old wings and battered wings, but God is allowing me to transform with new flight wings like these geese. And now I got new wings to fly through new storms, to fly through over new challenges and trials and tribulations. In other words, God is equipping you that whatever you got to go through to get to your destination, I'm going to bring you through it, even if it requires you to be grounded for 30 days so that you can grow out your new flight wings, even if it requires you to be blind like Paul Saul for 3 days and not eat for 3 days, to recognize and become aware of the blindness you were operating in when your eyes was open and you could physically see, but you couldn't see anything spiritual. Yes, here it is. Saul was very religious, but Paul was very spiritual. And so that's the transformation we must undergo. That's the new birth we have to happen, where we go from believing it's about us to knowing it's about God. We have to have a shift in our thinking, a dramatic shift in our thinking and way of life, where we wholly and totally put ourselves in God's hands and allow him to work on not only our character, but our condition. You off in a bad condition when you are not have a relationship with God, when you are not evaluating your relationship with God to see where I'm at with my weaknesses with God. What areas do I need to work on? When you are not acknowledging those things and then evaluating and analyzing those things, we should analyze and reevaluate and evaluate our relationship with God every single day. Just like Jesus taught him how to pray, he says, give us this our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. That we ought to keep it simple. And as we begin to go through the transformation process, God, just this day, let me get these few things right. God, this day, or God, thank you this day for your mercy. God, thank you this day just for your grace. God, thank you this day for allowing me to make this Bible study. God, thank you this day. We got to learn to be appreciative and grateful for the major moves that God has made in our life, but also the subtle moves he had made on our life that have big impact down the road. Yeah, there's some things that God stopped you in your tracks so that you wouldn't kill yourself. He stopped you in your tracks because it was about to take your whole divine destination away. He stopped you in your tracks because he wanted to show all these people who believe that my son who has risen now, we finna snuff out his church just like that. And Saul is going to be the one to do it. No, I'm about to show the devil and I'm about to show the world that I'm finna take your main asset that you're using to try to destroy my church, and I'm about to use it for my good. In other words, something can look dirty, something can be filthy, something can be going through some stuff. But if God says that's my instrument, there's work to do in that individual's life. You can't see it, you might can't understand it, but it's your job, like Ananias, to do what God just told you to do. Because if you just do that, you're going to play a role in something bigger than what you can see right now. So I got to go now because I feel transformed. I got to go now because I'm working not only in and through my transformation. And so it can't happen. Let me put it to you like this. You got transformational Tuesdays and transformational Thursday, but let me tell you, transformation don't happen on 1 day a week or 2 days a week. This is something you got to be working at every single day. Every single day, I'm looking at some aspect of my transformation. And look, your transformation may not be complete, but I promise you this. When you decided that I'm going to transform, when you decided I'm going down this road with God, every day that you go down that road with God, you get better. Every storm that you go through with God, your faith gets stronger, your faith gets bigger, your patience gets extended, your prayers become consistent and constant. I got to leave you now, but I pray that if you want to really be transformed, one, you got to turn to God first and give him your time. You got to submit your life and your plan over to him. You got to give the deed to your life over to God and say, God, build what you're going to build here. God, do what you're going to do here. So redirection. It requires redirection. Is that not right? It requires redirection. It requires patience, and it requires a rebirth. Amen. And I pray that you have a rebirth of your relationship with God. You have a rebirth of your dreams of what you set out to accomplish at the beginning of the year, that you can have a rebirth on that. You just need to approach it in the new way. God bless you this evening. As you continue to transform, I want you to understand that animals in the animal kingdom go through a transformation or a metamorphosis, and that is a caterpillar goes to a butterfly. A caterpillar crawls around on land, but the butterfly flies around in the sky, but it still has to go through a cocoon process. It has to go through a gestation process. And if you're willing to go through that process, when you come out on the other side, you will be able to do things now that you could not do before. You will be able to see things that you can now see that you could not see before. And so the tadpole itself, it swims around in the pond, but it becomes a frog that hops around on land. So your transformation, be expectant that as you come through it and it gets completed, that you now are walking in an aspect of your life with God, that you have new abilities. This is a new chapter on your life, that God is giving you new access to do new things for the kingdom. God bless you today. Here's our prayer. Eternal and everlasting God, we thank you for transformation. We thank you for the ability to instantly become aware that change is necessary and we can begin transforming our lives. We thank you now, God, for we ask that you will increase us in our patience, oh God, because we know we have to be patient with the process. We ask, oh God, that you'll help us be consistent in our prayers, because consistent prayers give consistent power, consistent strength, consistent grace, consistent mercy. And when we're consistently praying, we stay consistently calm and comforted in your word, and we don't panic and then try to take it into our hands. And then finally, God, rebirth, that even though some ideas have been born already, even though we've been physically born, we have to have a mental rebirth, a spiritual rebirth, an emotional rebirth, a rebirth of hope, a rebirth of assurance, a rebirth of comfort, a rebirth of having a close relationship with you. We thank you now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I pray that you have been blessed by this, and we look forward to seeing you on next Wednesday as we continue to move through this process of transformation.